Welcome to Behind the Research, a podcast that will focus on the realities of stalking with first-hand accounts from victim survivors. I am your host, Karen Fullerton-Chalmers, and this series will focus on my doctoral research. Together, we'll explore the representation of stalking within film and television, as well as interviews with research participants to hear more about their stories and how these helped shape my findings. Caution is advised, as some content may be sensitive to listeners. Pseudonyms have also been used to protect participant identities. So in this first episode of Behind the Research, we are joined by Shikesh, who was stalked and abused in several ways by his family from the ages of 7 to 27. They would monitor him by not leaving his room until they had got all the information they wanted to know about his whereabouts, as well as waiting at the corner shop to see when he would get the bus to college without his knowledge. Shikesh, thank you so much for joining us today on the first episode of Behind the Research.
Yeah, it's when you told me about it, I was like, wow, finally. Because I remember like after we had spoken about the research, and then you had stated, I'm up for this award and this is what it could lead to. I'm like, if it does lead to that, amazing, because then you know the conversation is fully out there. But yeah, since then, a lot has, like, I've realized a lot. I think we spoke for like 2.5, 3 hours when we did the research. So much came out of it. And I think since then, a lot has happened personally. So I've been diagnosed with complex PTSD. But I've learned to say complex post-traumatic injuries rather than a disorder, because it's injury and not. And I just learned it in a male survivors group just last week. And so now I've started to say injury. So even with that, just how I see like the effects of what has happened. But the two major things that I've realized is something related to exposure therapy, which in the research that when we spoke in the research, it was how stalking is turned into a fetish within the media, and then how it then gets pushed into society. So that's one of the big things. And another major thing that I've realized is like just how unaware I was of what was happening, like within the home. Like it happened in such a way where I didn't even see it. I didn't even call it stalking because I didn't even think that's what was happening. And this is obviously how everything's portrayed. Like you grow up in an Indian household and it's sort of like strict and there's more rules and it's more traditional and all of this. But when I think probably how I understood it more is a few months ago, when I requested my medical records from Hospital down in London. That's where I was taken in 2011, where it was basically a suicide episode. And in the report, the one thing I read was, we need to see the family dynamic. And one thing that I've thought about is, what do you specifically mean by family dynamic? Because if you really look at it, like if you get to the bottom of any family, like no matter how traditional that family is, no matter how strong their beliefs and values are, no amount of abuse will ever be normal in any family. So to say abuse is the family dynamic and this is what's happening, it makes no sense whatsoever. And so when I think back to when it was happening and how my beliefs were shaped and how society had shaped my view on, oh, this is your family. You don't even the thing where you don't speak about what happens in the family home to anyone else, that alone. And one of the perpetrators literally told me, like, because I was that kind to speak outside of the family home, I wasn't one to just keep things quiet. And he was like, oh, you're not a family person. And I thought to myself, well, yeah, I'm not going to be a family person if you are going to abuse me, if you are going to stalk me, because that's not normal within the family home. And that's not what family is about. And the interesting thing about that is none of this is ever portrayed in any movies, any TV shows, media doesn't talk about it, nothing. So when I think back to when I was curious about how, people move on from abuse and things like that, stalking was never the thing that came up, ever. In any video that I watched, any survivor, it was always the usual how it's, there's a relationship, a romantic relationship, whether it's wife, husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, and that's how stalking happens. But it's never been portrayed how it happens within a family. And the reason it's never portrayed like that, because obviously it's seen as, oh, it's family problems. It's something that only the family deal with. But at what point do you say, okay, this is abuse. This needs to stop. Like, this isn't normal. It's not a family dynamic. There's no such thing as a family dynamic when abuse is happening. And now when I think of all the understandings that have come out of it, you can't look at stalking as a whole without understanding the entire scope of every aspect of how it happens. You can't just look at the relationship side and it was a boyfriend and girlfriend, or it was husband and wife and, husband and husband, or whatever gender is involved, whatever is happening, you can't just look at one aspect of it. In the family way, especially when it comes to Asian backgrounds and, of ethnic minorities, that's not looked at all because firstly, how many of those families are actually speaking out? How many of them are actually out there saying, you know what, this is what's happening to me, this is how it's happening to me. Sure, they will tell whether, they go to a religious place and they might confide in someone there, but then they will just close it down and they may not even know where to get the support. What if there isn't any support for that type of scenario? Then what are they going to do then? And that's the thing I didn't even understand myself. I don't think I ever came across a service where I read support for stalking, because it just hit me now. I'd never came across a service where it said support for stalking, because it's not even taken seriously by the authorities that much. The only time it's taken seriously is when something physical has happened. But that's usually seen as physical abuse or sexual abuse or rape. Sure, they might mention, yes, that this person was being watched and they were being stalked. But to put it alone as a separate crime, as a separate trauma, it's not seen like that by anyone, because it hasn't been spoken about it like that by anyone until now.
Yeah. And one thing you said to me when we spoke before about, that would be about a year ago now, when I was interviewing you, and you mentioned something to me, and it is one thing that has really lived with me now since we spoke, was that when you were younger and you were going through this, you wanted to call authorities, and on some occasions you did, but you never wanted to name it in certain ways because the people in your family were actually really good to your younger siblings, and you did not want them to be affected in any way by whatever consequence might happen. And that really stuck with me, especially I've got a younger sibling, so that really stuck with me. But we're talking about, like you've said, some really valid and great points about how it's not represented, and therefore we don't see it, or it's under-acknowledged. So when you did talk about it, or if you still talk about it, and you mention to people that your family put you through this, or you were stalked by your family, what kinds of reactions do you receive from people?
I think probably the time that I spoke about it, like the first ever time I even acknowledged to myself that I was actually stalked. It might have been in 2016 where a thought just went through my head, but I didn't take it seriously because it's like, it could be anything. Like it could be that, but it could just be it's happening within the family. How I saw it as was domestic abuse. That's how I saw it as a whole. Like, I did come across things like gaslighting, coercion, and so on in 2016. And that's where I got the gist of, okay, this is what's been happening. But I didn't see stalking separately at that time. I think the only time I saw it for the first time was after I escaped, I should say, in 2018. And I think it was maybe 2019, maybe 2020, where I came across a Twitter account. But it was basically to do with domestic abuse, and I got involved in the chat. It was like every Wednesday evening. It would be like Wednesday chats. And through that conversation, that's when it fully hit me, like, wow, okay, I was being stalked. Like, that was the first time I ever acknowledged. I mean, I acknowledged what was happening, but that was the first time I ever not acknowledged the word stalking on top of it. It was the first time I could actually name it as, this is a certainty, this is what happened. And the reaction I got was complete support, because I wasn't telling someone who didn't understand it, or I wasn't telling the people who were doing it, who would have probably just denied it. I was telling people who actually understood it because they experienced it themselves. And that's the first time I realized just how major it was. When I think of it like that, it really does matter who you tell. You need to speak to people who you know for a fact have a similar experience. That's where the acknowledgement of what has happened to you will be there, because they will tell you what this is called. And the reason why that's important is because when you put an actual name to it, when you know what you're dealing with, then you know what kind of support you need. Without that, you don't really know what kind of support you need. It's sort of like you've got some type of pain in your leg, but you don't know what kind of pain. And so you don't know what support you need for it. Do I need a crutch for it? Do I need a bandage? Like, put some cream on it? Is it going to go away? Like, what do I need, to make this pain go away? That's, from what I've just said, that's the difference of someone's recovery journey being delayed to having the support they need instantly. And I think for others who may have spoken out, and whether it's with the authorities or something, I mean, the reaction I got from the authorities when I told them in 2016, like when I had to call them to the house where I was physically assaulted by both perpetrators, and I had told them there was a child sexual abuse investigation going on. I had told them I was being emotionally, psychologically, emotionally abused throughout the entire thing. I had told them literally everything to raise concern. Basically everything that should have happened, it didn't happen. And they lied through the investigation, they lied in court, got away with the crimes they committed, and nothing happened to me. But I was left with the threat that if I spoke again, I could be homeless. I think back, like, what if I didn't go to the police? What if I just got help and then started living my life? I wouldn't be left with the permanent damages that I have now, such as having a vasectomy that took place in September. And that was traumatic itself, that I cried through the entire procedure. Not full procedure, but halfway through anyway. So that's the difference of the effects of the reaction you would get of telling someone who actually cares about you, and others who couldn't care less of whether you were dead or alive. And the reason why that is important is because if we are going to fight stalking, the authorities need to start caring about those who are experiencing it. And the biggest message I have for the authorities is they keep going on about prevention. We need to prevent crimes, and, we need to prevent further crime from happening. The only time they act when stalking is happening is when something physical has happened. You might as well not even bother dealing with it later on, because up to the point where you will deal with it when something physical has happened. Permanent injuries might already be left with a person who has experienced it. So you haven't prevented a crime. You've enabled it to continue. And then you've enabled the injuries where they have to live with that for the rest of their life. But then they want the support of those who have experienced it to prosecute the person who has done the harm. And then they just continue with another case like it's another day at the office, while a person who has experienced it doesn't even know how to go about their life anymore. Like, that's the reaction you get from different people who you tell matters so much. And I guess the message that I have for anyone who is going through anything is, before you even think about, like, if you're in a scenario where it's actually happening right now, absolutely call them. But if you're in a scenario where something has happened and you've moved away, you're not living with the perpetrator anymore, go to an organization who can support you, who can have the support in place, where you can understand what you need to do. Do you want to report it? Do you want to get the support? Because that's going to matter the most. The police aren't going to always do the good work they're supposed to do. Like, I'm a perfect example. You can't write this stuff. It's already happened. It's been a learning journey. Yeah.
I think that's a really important message, in the sense of getting support. And like you say, if you're going through stalking, report it, because it's very dangerous. But get a support behind you as you do that, whether that be from a professional organisation, whether that be from someone that you trust. And in the show notes, I'll also link different agencies that people can reach out to if they're going through something similar. And we do always encourage that, because it can be extremely isolating. It's a very isolating time. And Shikesh's case is a perfect example of when there's not a lot of recognition or understanding of it, especially within the family, how that can actually impact on someone massively. And we touched on there about there's little attention brought to familial stalking, and we spoke about it before, but that includes in film and television, because we know that a lot of us watch film and television, we do base opinions or form opinions round about things like that, and it is there to raise awareness as well. But what do you think is represented within film and television? So we touched there on, you touched on sort of intimate partners or within a relationship. Is that what you see portrayed in film and television, as opposed to what you have actually been through yourself?
Yeah, I mean, the one show that I loved watching, and I don't watch it anymore, because I think even me, as I went along with the healing journey, EastEnders just didn't do it for me anymore. Before, I could relate to every single character, like one way or another. But then I got to the point where I'm like, this is just drama. Like, I don't want to deal with it. When I think of shows that I've watched like that, I don't think there has been, I know there are more Asian families within EastEnders now than they were ever before, which is an amazing thing, because it's showing several different things of what goes on. But stalking-wise, I don't know if I've ever seen a film, a TV show that has portrayed it happening within family. It's always where a stranger is watching the house. It's always where some admirer. It's never the family stalking the family itself. I mean, it might show like how the family are living. It might show like there's certain things happening, but it's not going to show this is stalking. It's just going to show, oh, they're being abused by the family. Like, that's how it's said, that's how it's portrayed. But what we need to understand about TVs and films, and about just social media as a whole, like everything, the media, everything, one thing that it will always involve is releasing drama. That's its main goal. It's the reason the media, the mainstream media specifically, write headings in a specific way to cause anger within society, because they know they are going to get the hits, they are going to get the retweets, they are going to have people talking about it. That's the tactic they use. They know what they're doing. And when I think of it, when I think back now, like when I would like correct headlines and things like that. I look back now and I'm like, what were you doing? They know what they're doing. Like, you don't need to tell them. The one thing that I've understood, as I said at the start of this podcast, is specifically exposure therapy and like why survivors may turn to a relationship where something is happening, but this time it's consensual. But then it's also to the point where the TVs and films are pushing it out to completely remove the seriousness of it. Now, I have nothing wrong with two consensual people, or whether there's more involved, doing something that they've all agreed on. We are okay with this happening. Go enjoy yourselves, whatever. But to then remove the aspect of what's really happening isn't something that we're hearing about. Like this, how I think about it now is completely different to how I did when we spoke during the research. So this is what happens specifically. It depends if it's a completely new movie or show or one that's been renewed for another season. Now, if it's a completely new show and if the characters like aren't well known or people don't really know what other, arts they've been in or anything like that, it's not going to have the biggest hype to begin with. But when the premiere hits and everything, that's when it's going to start to have hype. That's when you'll have the mainstream media pushing it out, like this new show and interviews and all of that will be happening. But then you also have social media influencers who will be pushing it out, and the way they will speak and what they will say and how they will say it, that's going to push out the narrative of how people then see that show, how people then see that movie. And when it's portraying a certain message, you're not going to see that message. You're going to see it as what you've been made to visualize it as. Once that movie is out, everyone has watched it, or it's a show, whatever happens again. You give the feedback, like the social media influencers give the feedback. Now, the thing that needs to change about it is any show that portrays any sort of stalking or anything like that, there needs to be conversations happening within the media, happening with social media influencers, where you have the part where, yeah, okay, people are into this, people do this, but then you need to have that serious conversation. Let's not forget that this actually happens to people who don't want it to happen to them. And that's what we must keep in the light. We must never stop speaking about it, because right now it's probably happening to thousands and we can't do anything to stop it right now. Like, that's the reality. Every day when I wake up, that's one thing that pushes me to wake up. Like, with me continuing to raise awareness about this, I know for a fact someone somewhere is going to hear something, read something that I've put out, and it's going to help them when they need it. Because that's what I did. When I was struggling, I went online and I researched, how do people cope with this? That's the reason I know how much I know now. That's the reason I escaped in the first place, because I had that knowledge of what was happening. That's why it's important to continue raising awareness about these issues, because it might be all fun and games to like when it's just fictional, but in a sense it's not fictional, because movies and TV shows are a portrayal of real life. We are watching real life in the making. It's just those stories may not have actually happened in the way it has happened to other people, but they have happened nevertheless. That's what people need to understand.
Yeah, it's like that old phrase of life imitates art. We portray things that we think, or the media or films producers portray things that they think is what people want to see. And like you say, if you back someone, we know that it's built within us. We actively seek things that are already going to justify something that we believe.
Right.
Not saying that that's correct, because we should always be critical in our thinking, and people do that as well, but we actively do that because we need that justification of why we believe something. And the way that social media has grown so much, we get that validation, especially with a 30-second TikTok video. Do you know, we don't need to go and read this, and this. It's there already. And I think that is such a powerful message, what you said about raising awareness, not backing down, and having the real voices of real victim survivors in pop culture. It has to happen, and that's the only way for change to be made. So I suppose my final question for you is, what's next for you, Shikesh?
I guess, there's a professional life, personal life. Well, the thing that I'm doing right now personally is art therapy, and I've already ordered so much art supplies. And just earlier today, I was like glitter and everything. Like professionally, as I said, there's a psych education going on. So it's like third session or something, and there's 8 sessions. And that's just basically understanding how male survivors have been silenced, how they've been healing, what they think about society. And so that's shaping how I see the world now with everything that's going on. Like one thing many people don't know is in 2016, I would have transitioned into a female body, because just being in a male body, it just had several things going on. So I understand the whole trans issue, like from a male perspective of going through abuse and feeling like I need to transition into a female body. What I wouldn't have done was fight for women's rights and all of this, or see myself as a woman, because I wouldn't have been a woman. Like, this is just me personally. I didn't think I'm just a man in a woman's body who's trying to get through this life after experiencing trauma. And so that's helping me with professionally in that aspect of, I guess the main goal would be to be an international public speaker. And so all of these messages that I'm coming up with, it's sort of placing it into a performance. And like, I learned shadow puppetry with the organization just in September and everything. So all of these things that's coming together, it's sort of like one big show, several messages of, I guess, survival, healing, recovery, all these things that we talk about, but doing it in a way that it's never been spoken about before. So now it's sort of like breaking away from the past, letting that fall off. I guess you can say it's imagine a snake, and like it sheds its skin, but before it sheds its skin, you see like written scriptures all over it. And once it's shed its skin, it's no longer that story anymore. A new story, a new chapter, a new book needs to begin. I am currently working on the second book, so that's professional as well. So there are things happening. I guess once I have published that second book, it's then more fictional stuff of raising awareness, but also being myself. There's just several messages that are happening of what's going to come next into my life. But it's all positive nevertheless.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's I'm always in awe of people that turn their trauma and they turn it into something positive. And again, as we discussed before, it's a survival thing. It's about saying, I'm moving past this. And the snake analogy is a perfect one to explain sort of moving into that new journey or new chapter, excuse the pun, of your life. So no, Shikesh, really thank you so much for joining me today and being the first person on this section of the podcast. I really do appreciate it. So thank you so much.
No problem. Yeah. I'm just glad it happened. Like when you mentioned you'd won the award and the podcast happened and then the podcast is up for an award, I'm like, goodness, Karen is like on it. She's on the ball. Like nothing's stopping her. But no, for me to thank you for also doing this, because like it to you, it means a lot. It's not just something you're doing it for education and then moving on. It's something you deeply care about. And it, like, from this conversation, it's why I did this podcast in the first place, because I know you care about it. From when you spoke in the research, it was completely clear that you cared about it. So if anyone's listening, if anyone wants to speak to Karen, go ahead, because she will be there for you.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I'll also leave in the show notes different organisations that you can reach out to. Thank you, Shikesh. Thanks for listening to Behind the Research. You can follow my research journey on LinkedIn and X at Karen Fullerton C. Special thanks to all research participants for taking part in my thesis and entrusting me with their story. And thanks to the Scottish Graduate School of Social Science and the University of the West of Scotland.